Well, there's the world of difference, really, isn't there, between some of these different allegations that are circling at the moment about gambling that's been happening by politicians on the election. Some people clearly taking a punt, as it were, betting against themselves, a punt that they'll lose an election, maybe a bit misjudged, but of a different order from people taking a bet potentially based on information they had privileged access to from a tight cabal around the Prime Minister to do with the date of the election. But the result of the Gambling Commission letting all these allegations sort of surface and pursuing them all is that there's a sort of blurring potentially in the public mind and a sense of sort of plague on all your houses. You can understand why the Gambling Commission is doing this. It is hideous for an organisation like that to be at the centre of an election row, and they want to prove their impartiality. But it also means that the man who's behind in every single poll of recent times, Rishi Sunak, is having more and more days when he can't put his agenda at the top of the bulletins, on the front pages of the newspapers, because everybody's talking about gambling. He has another opportunity tonight to try and move people onto his agenda. The last debate, he wanted more of them. Not sure how exactly that would have gone. We know from his first debate, his game plan, he tends to sort of push his own argument, try and land his message almost at any cost, certainly at the cost of politeness, perhaps, and speaking over people. He might do that again. Will he really shift the dial? Can you, this late in an election? I wouldn't bet on it.
You look younger in person.
For Keir Starmer, the luck just seems to roll in. He did have to suspend one Labour candidate for betting against himself, but emphasised that was of a different order from allegations of insider dealing on the election date.
I made very clear that if any of my candidates was being investigated in relation to the Gambling Commission, I'd remove them straight away, which is what I've done. That's in a sharp contrast to Rishi Sunak, who took days and days and days before he took action.
Indeed, striking a sharp contrast with Rishi Sunak seems to have governed his whole intervention. Rishi Sunak was keeping a lower profile on the campaign trail ahead of tonight's debate. An official Tory tweet asked what would go up during a Labour government, and the answer gave an indication what line Rishi Sunak will be trying to land on tonight's TV debate audience, and maybe also how frequently. Viewing figures for TV leaders' debates have slipped since 9.5 million tuned in for the very first one in 2010. But might the second debate, as at the last election, coming at the end of the campaign, suffer a further drop-off in audience?
TV debates are great, but they don't normally sway people's votes a huge amount. And I think at this point, everything is already baked in. It would need Rishi Sunak to make Keir Starmer completely fall apart in a way that we've never seen before, I think, to even move the dial.
The Liberal Democrat leader's team had devised another eye-catching photo opportunity for his visit to Chelmsford. Sir Ed Davey waded into Gamblegate, calling for a review into all political gambling.
Well, joining us now is the Home Secretary, James Cleverly. Good evening. I want to begin with our lead story tonight, which you won't have watched, but your office is aware of. We told the story of a young, injured orphan from Gaza who has just come to this country after a Labour MP, Jess Phillips, contacted the Immigration Minister and organised a visa. Now, he's here, and that's a sort of a good ending for his current statement, but there are 17,000 orphans in Gaza. And Britain doesn't have a scheme the way it does for Ukrainians. Why don't we treat Gazan children with the same compassion as we do everybody in Ukraine?
Well, Christian, I can't comment on that individual case. As I say, you're only just giving me the information on that now. We have been, and we are incredibly generous in our support for refugees and those people who are in areas of conflict across the whole world, not just Gaza, across the whole world.
But there is no scheme for Gaza,
is clearly not the right art. Bringing everyone to the UK that is in a war zone is clearly not a credible answer, but we've been at the forefront of making sure that aid gets into Gaza. I've spoken, even as Home Secretary, with my former Egyptian counterpart, trying to work how we can get that aid through the Rafah crossing into Gaza. And of course we need to do what we continue to do, which is finding a way of making sure that the hostages are released by Hamas.
But why did we throw the doors open to everyone in Ukraine?
And we work towards a two-state solution.
Where people in Ukraine could just get a visa whenever they wanted it. Why did we throw the doors open to everyone in Ukraine, but we don't offer the same compassion to people in Gaza?
We have been at the forefront of making sure aid gets through to Gaza.
No, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you about the difference between Ukraine and Gaza.
Situation to the situation in Ukraine. There are fundamentally different.
We have a greater responsibility in Palestine, don't we? Because we created
fundamental different. And therefore, the work that we do in support of people subject to conflict in many other parts of the world, it's different area by area, equating the two.
I know it's different. I'm asking you why, but never mind.
I think it's a moot point because they are so very different in terms of the nature of the.
No, well, they are different, and Britain has a greater responsibility, arguably, in the Middle East because obviously it was the colonial power. But we'll move on. I mean. There were also today the discovery
that. Because I don't.
No, it wasn't a question. I just want to move on.
Sorry, was that a question?
No. I just want to move on.
Okay.
We found out today that failures across multiple agencies contributed to the rape and murder of Zara Alina in June 2022. Do you think the government owes her family an apology for those failures?
Well, I will need to look at the circumstances around that. And of course, the job in government is to make sure that when agencies of the state do not perform at the level that we want, where failures do occur, and particularly where failures culminate in something as tragic as this, that we do find out exactly what's happened, what needs to be done differently, and to make sure that changes are driven forward. And I've done that as Home Secretary whenever there has been a failure, or indeed a potential failure of the agencies of the state. And of course, if re-elected, I will make sure that we look at the circumstances underpinning this and try to make sure that whatever the circumstances are, that we address them and drive improvement.
OK, but no apology for now. Let's come to the betting scandal, which is sort of consuming the election campaign at the moment. What is this about your colleagues in the Conservative Party that gives them such bad judgment?
Well, we know that candidates from a number of parties are being investigated about betting. The Prime Minister, when he heard about the situation in our own party, was furious. We initiated internal process, and that is why we've withdrawn support for two candidates. The Gambling Commission is conducting its own investigations, and of course we are not going to comment on that. But when we said we wouldn't comment, that didn't mean to say we weren't going to take action. So we've looked internally, made sure there is due process, but the party has concluded that the behaviour was inappropriate, and therefore we've withdrawn support from those candidates.
I mean, isn't the real problem with the betting scandal, though, is that it's a story that reminds voters of all the other scandals that go back through the various Conservative governments that we've had over the last few years, of Partygate, of Boris Johnson's lies and his loans and free holidays, of Matt Hancock, of the PPE scandal, of Owen Paterson and Chris Pincher, and Neil Parish and tractor pornography, and Rob Roberts and his sexual advances, and Imran Ahmed Khan and Charlie Elphick sent to jail, and Liz Truss and her resignation honours list. That's the real problem, isn't it? That people look back on all of that and think you're morally bankrupt, it's time to get rid.
Well, the head of the debate, with me now is Wes Streeting.
Well, candidates from a number of political parties are being investigated, and I am not going to defend some of the things that have happened in the past. And of course, investigations and bad headlines are not unique to the Conservative Party. I mean, Keir Starmer was investigated for potential breaches of COVID.
Yeah,
Angela Rayner was investigated for perceived irregularities in her taxes. Now, the point is, the Prime Minister took action. That's why we've withdrawn support from those candidates. But as we know, candidates from a number of parties are being investigated by the Gambling Commission.
Right. After the Liz Truss budget in October the 13th, 2022, in an interview, you said changing Prime Minister would be a disastrously bad idea. Were you right or wrong?
Well, the inevitable disruption that comes with changing a Prime Minister has happened. Now, I've been able to work with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, and what we have seen is that because of the decisions that he has taken, inflation has come down from over 11%
Was it a bad
down
idea?
to 2%.
Or a good idea?
That we've been able to cut taxes for working people. We are committed to further taxes for working people, further taxes, further tax cuts for the self-employed, and that is in stark contrast with what we now know is true, which is the Labour Party have not been honest with the British people. You talk about honesty and integrity. We have now seen Keir Starmer basically say he was being dishonest about
we're
Jeremy
off the point
Corbyn,
now.
but he didn't
Let's stick
think
with your
it
record.
mattered. Oh no! Hang on.
I'm sticking on your record. I'm sticking on your record. You called Theresa May.
You went through a long history of things.
Yeah.
You went through a
That's
long.
my job.
And I did
I'm
not
asking you
interrupt
questions.
So let me finish my point.
No.
And my job is to answer those questions.
Yeah,
so
and
please
you're
let
not.
me do so. The fact is, Keir Starmer confessed to being dishonest to the British people, but he didn't think it mattered because he said he didn't think Corbyn would be elected.
Okay, this
He
is
didn't think
not
he was going to
a
get
soapbox
caught.
for you to just say whatever you want. I'm asking you about your record.
We now hear the shadow.
It's time for a question, James.
The shadow number 2 at the Treasury, basically saying they are being dishonest about green taxes.
Now,
he said
on your
28 billion,
record at the Home Office,
they're only saying
let's
that
talk
number
about the Home
because
Office,
of media pressure.
because you're the Home Secretary.
And the real figure
James
would be
Cleverly,
hundreds
this is not
of
a speech.
billions. His words.
Please stop. I want to ask you a
hundreds
question.
Of billions.
Now, at the Home Office...
Well, you keep making statements and not asking questions. So I'm answering the questions that you have got in backlog, and you keep interrupting me, preventing me from answering the questions when it's inconvenient to you. So
was net migration
answer your questions
of over 700,000...
Ask the questions, and I will answer them.
Was net migration of over 700,000 as a result of the immigration system that your government was in charge of after you took back control after Brexit a good or a bad thing for Britain?
We have said that the immigration figures over the last couple of years have been too high. That is in large part because of a completely unique set of circumstances, including the initial outflow and then move back of a whole load of people because of COVID.
But they were your rules.
Because of our offer to the Hong Kong Chinese. Oh, please let me answer the question. You keep interrupting me. They are a unique set of circumstances because of the conflict in Ukraine, because of the offer that we made to Hong Kong Chinese, because of the offer we made to Afghans who supported us during that military operation. But we have said that figure is too high. I have put actions in place which are already bringing that figure down. Actions which were opposed by the Labour Party at the time, a party that is not committed to dealing with immigration. So if you want to control the borders, the only party with a credible plan and a commitment to do so is the Conservative Party, because Keir Starmer has said he believes all immigration law is racist.
Now, you called Theresa May's 2017 election
about choices.
Somewhere
the choice,
the
choice between a Conservative government and a Labour government. Elections about choices.
It's an election.
So
you get to choose. Now, you called Theresa May's 2017 election somewhere between the worst campaign in living memory and the worst campaign ever. Where do you rank Rishi Sunak?
Well, all campaigns are difficult, and of course we look at the poll numbers. I'm not going to be overly swayed by the poll numbers because ultimately it's about campaigning, and I will continue to campaign right until 10 o'clock on the 4th of July, as will all the other candidates, I'm sure. And we will continue to make the point that we are determined to bring down taxes, to put more police officers on the street. Neither of those commitments have been made by the Labour Party. We are determined to keep the downward pressure on inflation and to increase defence spending, neither of which have been committed to by the Labour Party. And that is the message that we will continue to take to the British people right up until polling day.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now, when it comes to tax benefits and spending, pensioners have been the big winners since 2010, according to the Resolution Foundation think tank. It's been looking at intergenerational fairness and found that working-age households have seen their benefits cut, while more money is going to the over 65s as people live longer. And it warned that politicians are intensifying this shift by continuing to push up pensions with the triple lock. Here's our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, who is with me. Do have a seat.
Well, Chris, this election has been a bit thin on the ground when it comes to those big policy ideas that are going to tackle, big intergenerational inequality themes. And today, the Resolution Foundation published its research saying what's been going on since 2010. And it talks about two factors, the demographic factor and the policy factor. We know we're all getting a bit older, regrettably, but despite the fact that the pensionable age has gone up, the number of pensioners has also gone up by about 500,000. But what the Resolution Foundation say is that it's policy choices in the last 14 years that have exacerbated this inequality.
So what are the choices that matter?
Well, let's talk about in-work benefits and working age benefits, because there's three eras here. You've got the austerity years from 2010 to 2015, where working age benefits were cut or eligibility frozen. After that, they're simply frozen. It's not until 2019 that you get to a place where low incomes are slowly clawing back what was lost. But while working age benefits were frozen, pensioners were guaranteed by the triple lock. That means their pensions were always going up by 2.5%, up by earnings or up by inflation. And given those last two things have been on a tear, it's netted pensioners an extra £44 billion in real terms since 2010. And this is what that policy has translated to in terms of incomes. Look, pension incomes up 60% since 2010, earnings up 46%. Now, that's before inflation, alas. But look at working age benefit. That's only up 30%, half of what pensioners have got. And for the Resolution Foundation, they say this has helped tip the scales of fairness because, on average, pensioners have seen their benefits go up £900, while working age people have seen their benefits go down £1,400.
So what are the two main parties saying about this?
Well, it depends whether you're talking about vibe, Krish, or hard policies, because if you're talking about hard policies, there's not a lot to go on. Both parties have signed up to the freeze on thresholds. That's bad for all of us, but particularly bad for the young. Both parties have signed up to the triple lock. Neither party have committed to changing anything when it comes to housing allowance or the cap on two-child benefits. Now, those two policies are particularly bad for young people and even worse for young people with families. The only place where you see some kind of reforms is on housing and trying to help generation rent. But Resolution Foundation warn, simply not enough.
Thanks, Helia. Kathy.
Thanks, Krish. Well, joining me now is Labour's Darren Jones, who's the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Darren Jones, just to pick two of the figures that Helia ran through there, pensioner benefits up by £900. Benefits for people of working age, on average, have fallen by £1,400. How is that fair?
Good evening, Kathy. I'm afraid I didn't hear the whole piece from Helia, but based on the question you've given to me, of course, that's part of the cost of living crisis, especially for many working families, remembering that a lot of working people are actually in receipt of universal credit because of low pay and pay not keeping up with the cost of living. That's why we in the Labour Party have said getting the economy back on track and into a period of growth where you'll see pay rise in line with the cost of living and inflation coming down is so important, but we'll only get to that if we bring stability back to our politics and our economic policy, and that will only happen if people vote Labour on July the 4th.
Right, OK, but if you don't get growth, you've got a problem. And, you know, the IFS is accusing you of a conspiracy of silence. We'll come back to that in a minute. If you don't get growth, then how are you going to rectify this unfairness? Because you're keeping the pension triple lock. On the other hand, you're freezing income thresholds and you're keeping the two-child limit. This inequality is going to persist, isn't it?
Well, look, if we win the election next week, we inherit the status quo from the Conservatives, that's right. We will set out our spending plans in a subsequent Labour budget and Labour spending review. But you're right to start the question with our focus on growth, because the long-term sustainable answer to getting public finances back on track is to get the economy growing again. We're very confident about our plans to unlock investment and improve productivity across the economy, as well as modernising the delivery of our public services so that the budget that we put into them goes further in terms of the outcomes that people have experienced. It's the government's job to do that.
But could you start a conversation about ditching the pensions triple lock? Would you have the courage to do that?
Well, we've committed to the triple lock because, of course, pensioners are on fixed incomes, and what they've experienced over the last couple of years, when the Conservatives crashed the economy, inflation went through the roof, energy bills spiked, people on fixed incomes are not reflected in any way in terms of the way the economy is structured. And so that's why we think it's important to commit to the triple lock for pensioners, but recognising that there are intergenerational inequalities there that we need to challenge, but that has to come through economic growth, opening up opportunity, and allowing people to get on and do well in life.
My point is, if you're committing to the pension triple lock, which you are, and you don't get growth, then this inequality is going to persist. So what are you going to do about that? Will you have an honest conversation about the fact that more people are getting older, and that therefore that inequality is going to carry on unless you do something in policy terms about it?
The premise of your question assumes that we will fail on getting the economy growing. As I say, we are very confident about getting the economy back on track and growing because we spent years talking to investors, business leaders and trade unions. Well, you've got to get the economy back on track. You can't get to a position where you say, it's okay if the country's constantly in recession, the tax burden's going up and we're spending money on failing public services. That status quo is not acceptable. We say that things can be different and they must be different, and that's what Labour's offering at the election next week, but people will have to vote for it.
There is no alternative, to quote Margaret Thatcher. Let me just ask you about our lead story tonight on Gaza, which is about Gazan orphans. We talk about the first orphan who has been allowed to come here, and the fact there is no visa scheme established. Will a Labour government, if you're elected next week, would you commit to establishing a visa scheme like the Ukrainian one so that orphans in Gaza could rejoin extended family here?
Well, look, we'll of course want to do the best we can by those orphans that you've explained in your question. Of course we would. The British people would expect us to do that. And we are a compassionate party and we want to make that work. Of course, it's a scenario that you have to work with allies and other countries around the world. And I suspect that those conversations will happen with my colleagues in the Shadow Cabinet if we win the election next week.
Darren Jones, thank you very much for joining us.